Right, switching tracks a little bit from verb tense to verb voice, we are learning to differentiate between active and passive voice. So by the end of this lesson, you will be able to define verb voice, active voice, and passive voice, explain how passive voice is made, and identify whether a sentence is active or passive voice. You will then be able to correct a passive voice sentence to the active voice. So your keywords are subject, verb voice, active voice, and passive voice. And verb voice just tells us whether or not the subject of the sentence is performing the action of the sentence. So as a reminder, subject is who or what the sentence is about. And what we're looking for with verb voice is whether this who or what is the one actually doing what the verb is talking about. There are two different verb voices. Active voice, where the subject is the person performing the action, and passive voice, the subject does not perform the action of the sentence. To identify verb voice, you simply highlight the subject, your who or what, underline the verb, and then ask, is the subject the person doing the action of the verb? If the answer is yes, the sentence is in active voice. If the answer is no, then it's passive voice. So taking a look at some examples, the teacher presented a new project. The teacher is the who or what of the sentence, so we've highlighted teacher. Presented is the action, so we've underlined that verb. Now, is the teacher performing the action of presenting? Yes. So this sentence would be active, as opposed to the project was presented by the teacher, where the subject, project, is no longer doing the presentation. She cooked dinner. Dinner was cooked by her sister. The conductor directed the orchestra. The orchestra was directed by the conductor. Each of these is an active-passive pairing, where you can see in the first one, the highlighted subject has performed the underlined action, and in the second one, the highlighted subject has not performed the underlined action. Those where the subject is the one performing the action are active, and the ones where they are not are passive. So, what do you notice about the passive voice sentences? Take a quick look at them and see what you often find. You should note that your passive voice sentences are frequently using a phrase that starts with the word by, and they also use a past participle construction that involves a be verb, was presented, was cooked, was directed. This is not a perfect tense because it's using the be verbs and not have, has, or had. However, it is still past participle and it's forming passive. So, let's do a little bit of troubleshooting here. The sculpture was created sometime in the last century. The book was written. In each case, we can identify sculpture as the subject or book as the subject, and created and written as the action. But we don't see that little by phrase that really clues us in, so here's a trick. When you're not sure, right after the verb, insert the phrase by zombies. If this makes grammatical sense, then the sentence is passive. The sculpture was created by zombies sometime in the last century. Yep, that one's passive. The book was written by zombies. Yep, passive. So you can add that by phrase in, and you could say by zombies, by clowns, by kittens, by anything, but just this kind of grouping after the verb to help you out. So I want you to take some time, jot these examples down in your notes, and practice whether or not these sentences are active or passive. Pause your video and practice this now. taking a look at those questions. Going through our practice sentences, we're going to figure out whether our questions were active or passive using our process. Number 1, we can identify the subject as elm trees, the action as planted, but we know that the elm trees did not plant themselves, so number 1 is passive. For number 2, they is the subject, welcome is the action. They are the ones welcoming the students, so it is active. Number 3, I was comforted by your kind words. I is the subject, comforted is the action. We see our by phrase and our be verb past participle, which means this one is actually passive because the kind words are what's doing the comforting, not the person who is being comforted. And number 4, the leftovers were heated in the microwave. This one's kind of tricky. We don't see a by phrase. But the leftovers are not the ones heating. It's actually the microwave that's doing the heating. So you could also say the leftovers were heated by zombies in the microwave, which means number 4 is actually passive. Paying attention to those carefully. One other thing we look at with active voice and passive voice is that we prefer to use active voice wherever possible. So to find this and fix it, you would underline your verb, highlight the person performing the action, and then rewrite the whole sentence so that the person you've highlighted becomes the subject of the sentence and therefore is performing the verb. For example, the project was presented by the teacher becomes the teacher presented the project. Dinner was cooked by her sister. Her sister cooked dinner. The orchestra was directed by the conductor. The conductor directed the orchestra. These make very concise, more readable sentences, and all we did was shift our highlighted subject to the subject spot, our highlighted individual to the subject spot, so that they become the subject of the sentence. Try and correct each of these sentences to active voice. They are all already in passive voice. You simply need to change them to active. Pause your video and try this now. Taking a look, Langston Hughes wrote the poem. The model wore the designer gown. Several neighbors shared the garden. And Harvey's ball knocked down the bowling pins. Becomes the following things when you have corrected them. So the poem was written by Langston Hughes. Now Langston is actually doing the writing. The designer gown was worn. Now the model is wearing it. Several neighbors shared the garden instead of the garden was shared. And Harvey's ball knocked down all the bowling pins. Please note that the verbs stayed in past tense. We just got rid of the past participle and moved our subject, our performer, to the subject spot. So make sure you've answered the formative questions on this assignment.